The autumn leaves were falling thick across Ann Arbor, Michigan, painting the streets around the University of Michigan campus in shades of amber and crimson. It was the kind of evening that made tourists stop and take photos, the kind that filled the local coffee shops on Liberty Street with students discussing philosophy and art. But Marcus Webb wasn't admiring the scenery as he walked past the iconic Michigan Theater. His mind was elsewhere, churning through incantations he'd memorized years ago, preparing for the ritual he'd conduct that night in his apartment on South State Street. For 15 years, Marcus had been deeply immersed in the occult. What started as teenage curiosity in his hometown of Ypsilanti had evolved into an all-consuming lifestyle. His bookshelves groaned under the weight of grimoires and ancient texts. His walls were adorned with symbols that would make most people uncomfortable. He'd gained a reputation throughout Washtenaw County and beyond as someone who could read tarot cards with unsettling accuracy, who knew rituals that supposedly granted power and insight, who walked a path most people feared to even acknowledge existed. "Marcus, you coming to the game tonight?" called Jake Morrison, a colleague from the tech startup where Marcus worked as a software developer. Jake was standing outside Zingerman's Delicatessen, a paper bag of their famous Reuben sandwich in hand. "Can't make it," Marcus replied, forcing a smile. "Got plans?" Jake nodded, used to Marcus's evasiveness about his evening activities. Most people in Ann Arbor prided themselves on being open-minded, accepting of alternative lifestyles and beliefs. Marcus's interest in the occult was seen as quirky, maybe a bit eccentric, but hardly scandalous in a city that embraced diversity of thought. What they didn't know was how deep Marcus had gone, how the practices that seemed harmless on the surface had led him down darker and darker corridors, how the power he'd sought had come with a price he was only beginning to understand. That night, as the sun set over the Huron River and the lights began to glow along Main Street, Marcus prepared his ritual space. He'd done this hundreds of times before. The candles, the symbols drawn in chalk on his hardwood floor, the incense that filled his apartment with cloying smoke. He'd been working towards something significant, a summoning he'd been preparing for over 2 years. Tonight, he believed, he would finally achieve the breakthrough he'd been seeking. The clock on his wall read 11:47 p.m. when he began. The ritual required precise timing, aligned with celestial movements he'd calculated meticulously. As midnight approached, Marcus chanted in languages that predated English by millennia, his voice growing stronger, more confident. He felt the familiar sensation of energy building in the room, the sense that reality was becoming thinner, more permeable. Then something unexpected happened. The energy shifted. Instead of the dark, heavy presence he was attempting to summon, the room suddenly filled with light. Not the flickering glow of his candles, but something altogether different. Pure, brilliant, overwhelming. Marcus fell backward, his carefully drawn symbols seeming to burn away as if they'd never existed. The light wasn't just in the room, it was somehow inside him, penetrating every shadow he'd cultivated in his soul over 15 years. And then he saw her. The figure was radiant, neither fully male nor female, with features that seemed to shift like sunlight on water. Wings that weren't quite physical stretched behind the being, and Marcus understood with sudden, terrible clarity that he was in the presence of something authentically divine. Not the entities he'd been attempting to contact, not the forces he'd convinced himself were sources of ancient power. This was something else entirely. Marcus Andrew Webb. The voice didn't come through his ears but resonated directly in his consciousness. "Do you understand what you have been doing?" Terror unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced flooded through him. In that moment, with that light piercing every corner of his being, he saw himself clearly for the first time in years. He saw how he'd been deceived, how the power he'd pursued was nothing but chains disguised as liberation. He saw the path he'd been walking and where it truly led. And he saw, with devastating clarity, how much time he'd wasted, how much of his life he'd surrendered to darkness, while convincing himself he was becoming enlightened. "I thought," Marcus's voice cracked, "I thought I was seeking truth." "You were seeking power," the being replied, but without condemnation. Only statement of fact. And power without love is merely destruction wearing an attractive mask. What happened next would be impossible for Marcus to fully describe. Even months later, when he tried to put the experience into words, time seemed to stop or expand or become irrelevant. The being showed him things, not with words, but with pure understanding. He saw spiritual warfare that had been raging around him. Invisible battles fought over his soul while he'd been completely oblivious. He saw how prayers from people he'd barely known, his grandmother in Dearborn before she passed, a former girlfriend in Detroit who'd worried about him, even strangers who'd felt prompted to pray for someone caught in darkness, had created a protective barrier that had kept him from going too far, from crossing a line he couldn't return from. He saw the truth about the entities he'd been contacting, saw them as they really were, stripped of the attractive facades they wore. Where he'd perceived wisdom and power, he now saw only hatred and hunger, beings that fed on human suffering and delighted in deception. And he saw something else, something that broke him completely. Love, unconditional, relentless, pursuing love that had never given up on him even as he'd run deeper into darkness. Love that had been waiting for this moment, for a crack in his defenses wide enough to pour light through. Marcus didn't remember falling to the floor, but that's where he found himself when awareness returned. Dawn light was streaming through his windows. The candles had burned down to nothing. The symbols on his floor were gone, and Marcus was weeping harder than he'd wept since he was a child, great shuddering sobs that shook his entire body. He was also changed, fundamentally, irreversibly altered. The first thing Marcus did that morning, after the crying finally stopped, was gather every occult book, every ritual implement, every talisman and charm he'd collected over 15 years. He loaded them into his car, drove to the parking lot behind the community church on Huron Street, and dumped them in their large trash receptacle. A pastor named David Chen, arriving early to prepare for Sunday service, watched in amazement as Marcus made trip after trip from his car. "Are you okay?" Pastor Chen finally asked, concern evident on his face. Marcus turned to him, eyes still red from crying. "I don't know, but I need to tell you something. I need to tell someone what happened to me last night." They sat in Pastor Chen's office for 3 hours. Marcus described his years in the occult, the progression from curiosity to obsession, the rituals and practices he'd engaged in, and then he described the vision, the celestial being, the light that had shattered his darkness. Pastor Chen listened without interruption, his expression moving from concern to awe. "Marcus," the pastor said when the story was finished, "I believe you've experienced what we call a supernatural intervention. God broke through in a way you couldn't ignore or rationalize away. The question now is, what are you going to do about it?" "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "I don't even know where to start. I've spent 15 years going in the opposite direction." "Then we'll walk back together," Pastor Chen said simply. "That's what community is for." The transformation wasn't immediate or easy. Marcus discovered that renouncing the occult was only the beginning. He had to rebuild his entire worldview, had to learn to see reality through a completely different lens. He started attending services at the community church, at first sitting in the back row, uncomfortable with the hymns and prayers that felt foreign after so many years of completely different spiritual practices. But slowly, things began to change. Sarah Martinez, a longtime member of the church who owned a bookstore on 4th Avenue, took Marcus under her wing. She'd been involved in New Age practices herself decades earlier and understood the journey he was undertaking. "The enemy doesn't give up territory easily," she warned him one afternoon as they shared coffee at Espresso Royale. "You're going to face opposition, spiritual opposition, but also doubts, memories, temptations to go back. That's normal, but you're not alone anymore." She was right about the opposition. Marcus experienced what he could only describe as spiritual attacks in the weeks following his vision, nightmares that left him shaking and drenched in sweat, sudden, inexplicable anxiety that would grip him out of nowhere, moments where everything he'd experienced that night felt like a hallucination or a psychological break rather than a genuine supernatural encounter. But each time doubt threatened to overwhelm him, something would happen to strengthen his resolve. A conversation with another former occultist who'd found faith, a sermon that spoke directly to his specific struggles. Small miracles, there was no other word for them, that reminded him the vision had been real. 3 months after his experience, Marcus decided to share his story more publicly. He created a blog, calling it From Darkness to Light, One Man's Journey. He wrote honestly about his years in the occult, not glorifying them but not minimizing them either. He described the emptiness he'd felt despite accumulating so much supposed spiritual knowledge. He wrote about the vision, about the celestial being, about the love that had pursued him even into the darkest places he'd explored. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within a week, his blog had thousands of views. People began reaching out, some hostile, accusing him of betraying his former path or fabricating his story for attention. But many more were grateful, even desperate. They'd been involved in similar practices and felt trapped. They'd sensed something was wrong but didn't know how to break free. Marcus's story gave them hope that change was possible. Jennifer Wu, a college student at Eastern Michigan University in Ypsilanti, sent him a message that particularly moved him. She'd been involved in Wicca for 3 years and had begun experiencing spiritual oppression she couldn't explain. Reading Marcus's account, she recognized her own situation. "I thought I was becoming more spiritual," she wrote, "but I just feel more empty and afraid. Can you help me?" Marcus met with Jennifer at a cafe near the EMU campus. He shared his experience, emphasizing that he wasn't trying to convert her but simply offering his testimony. By the end of their conversation, Jennifer was in tears. "I felt that love you described," she said. "I felt it when I was a child, before I got involved in all this. I thought I'd lost it forever, but it's still there, isn't it? Still waiting for me." Stories like Jennifer's multiplied. Marcus found himself counseling people throughout Washtenaw County and beyond who were trying to leave occult practices. He connected with Pastor Mark Sullivan at Grace Bible Church in Ann Arbor, who had experience in spiritual warfare and deliverance ministry. Together, they began hosting support groups for people transitioning away from occult involvement. The meetings were held at the church on Thursday evenings. The first gathering had 7 attendees. Within 2 months, they were regularly seeing 30 or more people, many driving from as far as Detroit and Grand Rapids after hearing about the group through word of mouth and social media. Marcus also reached out to Dr. Richard Hoffman, a Christian psychologist in Ann Arbor who specialized in treating people recovering from spiritual abuse and occult trauma. Dr. Hoffman helped Marcus understand the psychological dimensions of his experience, how trauma bonding and cognitive dissonance had kept him trapped in destructive patterns. "What you're describing is not uncommon among people who've been deeply involved in occult practices," Dr. Hoffman explained during one of their sessions. "There's often an initial experience that seems empowering. You feel special, like you're accessing hidden knowledge. But over time, you become isolated, paranoid, convinced that you can't leave without dire consequences. It's a form of spiritual captivity that's very real, even if our secular culture doesn't acknowledge it." By spring, Marcus's story had spread beyond Michigan. A Christian documentary filmmaker named Thomas Reed, based in Nashville, Tennessee, reached out about featuring Marcus in a project about people who'd left occult practices. At first, Marcus was reluctant. He wasn't looking for fame or attention. But after praying about it and consulting with Pastor Chen and his new community of believers, he agreed. The documentary, titled Light Breaks Through, premiered online in June. Marcus's segment was one of 5 stories featured, but it resonated powerfully with viewers. His sincerity was evident, as was the genuine transformation he'd undergone. The footage included interviews with Jake Morrison, who described how radically Marcus had changed, and with Jennifer Wu, who shared how Marcus's story had helped her find freedom from her own occult involvement. Within days of the documentary's release, Marcus's inbox was flooded. People from across America and even internationally were reaching out. Some were curious, some skeptical, but many were desperate for the same freedom and peace Marcus had found. Among the messages was one from his estranged father, Robert Webb, who lived in Phoenix, Arizona. They hadn't spoken in over a decade, their relationship destroyed by conflicts over Marcus's life choices. Robert had watched the documentary after Marcus's cousin sent him the link. "Son," the message read, "I don't know if you'll even read this, but I watched your story. I've been praying for you since you were a teenager, since you first got involved in all that darkness. I never stopped, even when we stopped talking. I'm so grateful you found your way back to the light. I love you, I always have. If you're willing, I'd like to talk." Marcus stared at the message for a long time, tears streaming down his face. He'd blamed his father for being narrow-minded and judgmental, had severed that relationship while pursuing what he'd believed was spiritual enlightenment. Now he understood it differently. His father hadn't been opposing him. He'd been fighting for him, the only way he knew how. They talked on the phone for 3 hours that night, reconciling years of hurt and misunderstanding. Robert flew to Michigan the following month, and Marcus introduced him to Pastor Chen, to Sarah Martinez, to all the people who'd become his new family. Watching his father embrace these people who'd helped save his life was, Marcus later said, one of the most healing experiences of his entire journey. Not everyone was supportive. Marcus's former associates in the occult community viewed him as a traitor. He received threatening messages, curses pronounced against him, warnings that he'd pay for abandoning the path. One former friend, a practicing witch named Rachel Stone from Detroit, confronted him publicly at a coffee shop in Ann Arbor. "You think you're better than us now?" Rachel demanded, her voice carrying across the crowded cafe. "You think you found some ultimate truth? You're just scared, Marcus. You had a bad experience, probably a psychological break, and now you've run into the arms of the same religion that's oppressed people for centuries. It's pathetic." Marcus didn't respond with anger. Instead, he looked at Rachel with genuine compassion. "I don't think I'm better than anyone," he said quietly. "I just know I was deceived and now I'm not. I was in chains and calling it freedom. I was lost and pretending I'd found enlightenment. If you're truly happy where you are, I'm not going to argue with you. But if you ever feel the emptiness I felt, if you ever sense that something's missing despite all the rituals and power and supposed wisdom, I'm here. That's all I can say." Rachel left angry, but Marcus heard through mutual acquaintances that his words had affected her more than she'd let on. Seeds planted, he thought. That was all he could do. Plant seeds and trust that the same light that had broken through his darkness could reach anyone. By the time autumn returned to Ann Arbor, marking a full year since his transformative vision, Marcus's life bore no resemblance to what it had been. He'd been baptized at the community church, a public declaration of his faith that felt simultaneously terrifying and liberating. He'd started volunteering with at-risk youth in Detroit, sharing his story as a warning about the real dangers of occult involvement. He'd also met someone. Emily Patterson was a social worker at the University of Michigan Hospital, someone who attended the same church and had quietly admired Marcus's courage in publicly sharing his story. They'd started talking after services, conversations that stretched longer each week, and had recently begun officially dating. "I never thought I'd find someone who'd accept my past," Marcus confessed to her one evening as they walked along the Huron River, past the spot where crew teams practiced their rowing. "I come with a lot of baggage." Emily squeezed his hand. "We all do. But baggage doesn't define us. What we do with it does. And you've turned your past into something that's helping so many people." The support group had continued growing. They'd recently had to move to a larger space at the church to accommodate everyone who wanted to attend. Marcus had also been invited to speak at churches throughout Michigan, in Detroit, Grand Rapids, Lansing, and Traverse City, sharing his testimony and warning about the realities of spiritual warfare. Not everyone wanted to hear the message. Some churches were uncomfortable with the topic, preferring to avoid discussions of the occult altogether. But Marcus felt compelled to speak, especially to young people who were being drawn into occult practices through social media, television shows, and peer influence, often without understanding what they were really getting involved in. The enemy's greatest trick, Marcus told a youth group at First Baptist Church in Dearborn, is making people think he doesn't exist, making occult practices seem harmless, even enlightening. "I believed I was gaining power and wisdom. I believed I was becoming more spiritual. But I was really just becoming more enslaved. The real power, the real freedom, came when I surrendered to the one who created me, who loved me enough to break through my darkness with his light." The internet, as Marcus had discovered, was both a blessing and a challenge. His story had gone viral, shared across multiple platforms. YouTube videos discussing his testimony had accumulated hundreds of thousands of views. He'd been interviewed on several Christian podcasts and even appeared on a major Christian television network. But viral fame brought complications. Internet skeptics dissected every detail of his story, looking for inconsistencies or evidence of fabrication. Former occultists attacked him online, some questioning his motives, others claiming he'd never been seriously involved in the first place. Atheist forums mocked his celestial vision as obvious hallucination or psychological episode. Marcus learned to accept that he couldn't control how people received his story. Some would believe, some wouldn't. Some would be helped, others would be hostile. His responsibility was simply to tell the truth about what he'd experienced and continue living in the freedom he'd found. Winter came to Michigan, blanketing Ann Arbor in snow and ice. Marcus stood at his apartment window on South State Street one evening. watching the University of Michigan campus transform into a winter wonderland. Students hurried between buildings, bundled against the cold. Holiday lights glowed from shops along Liberty Street. Everything looked the same as it had a year ago, yet everything was completely different. His phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Wu. 1 year sober from Wicca today. Thank you for showing me the way out. Celebrating with my family. They never gave up on me either. Marcus smiled, his heart full. This was why he'd shared his story despite the criticism and controversy. For every person who mocked or doubted, there was someone like Jennifer who found hope and freedom. Someone who discovered they weren't trapped, that change was possible, that love was pursuing them just as it had pursued Marcus into the deepest darkness. He thought about the celestial being, about that night when light had shattered his carefully constructed world. He'd tried describing the experience countless times, but words always fell short. How do you explain love that intense, truth that clear, light that transformative? You couldn't, not really. You could only point toward it, like a signpost directing travelers toward home. Pastor Chen had told him once that his testimony was powerful, not because it was unique. Many people had similar stories of leaving darkness for light, but because he'd been willing to share it publicly, despite the personal cost. You're not afraid to look foolish, Chen had said. That's rare, and it makes your story credible in a way that polished, careful testimonies sometimes aren't. Marcus had laughed at that. I'm terrified of looking foolish, but I'm more terrified of staying silent while people suffer the way I suffered, believing the same lies I believed. As spring approached again, Marcus received an unexpected opportunity. Eastern Michigan University, his alma mater in Ypsilanti, invited him to participate in a panel discussion about alternative spirituality and religious experience. The event was organized by the Religious Studies Department and would include practitioners from various traditions, including a Wiccan priestess, a Buddhist monk, and an Islamic scholar. Some of Marcus's friends in the church were skeptical. They might just be setting you up to be attacked, warned Tom Rodriguez, a member of his support group. Academic environments can be hostile to Christian testimony, but Marcus felt a deep sense of peace about accepting the invitation. This was his old world, the academic, open-minded environment of southeastern Michigan, where all spiritual paths were supposed to be equally valid. He had a message that community needed to hear, even if it made people uncomfortable. The panel was held in late April at Pray Herald Hall on the EMU campus. The auditorium was packed with students, faculty, and community members. Marcus sat on stage with the other panelists, acutely aware that his perspective would be controversial in this setting. When it was his turn to speak, Marcus didn't hold back. He spoke about his years pursuing occult knowledge, about the emptiness beneath the supposed enlightenment, about the vision that had changed everything. He acknowledged that his testimony might offend some people, but emphasized that truth by its nature is often offensive to those who are living in deception. I'm not here to tell you that every spiritual path leads to the same destination, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the nervous energy crackling through the auditorium. I'm here to tell you that some paths lead to bondage disguised as freedom. I walked one of those paths for 15 years, and it nearly destroyed me. The only reason I'm standing here today is because someone loved me enough to intervene, to break through with truth powerful enough to shatter the lies I'd believed. The Wiccan priestess on the panel, a woman named Morgan Blackwell, responded with visible frustration. What you're describing sounds more like an individual psychological crisis than an indictment of all occult or pagan practices. Many of us have found genuine peace and empowerment through alternative spiritual paths. I'm not questioning your sincerity, Marcus replied. I was sincere too, but sincerity doesn't determine truth. I sincerely believed I was becoming enlightened. I was sincerely wrong. The discussion that followed was intense, with audience members asking challenging questions from multiple perspectives. But Marcus noticed something as the evening progressed. While some people seemed angry or dismissive of his testimony, others appeared deeply affected. A young woman in the third row was quietly crying. A male student kept nodding along as Marcus spoke, recognition evident on his face. After the panel ended, more than a dozen people approached Marcus. Some wanted to argue, to challenge his conclusions, but several were clearly struggling with their own spiritual involvement, their own questions about whether the path they were on was truly leading where they wanted to go. One young man, a sophomore named Alex Chen, pulled Marcus aside. "I've been practicing chaos magic for 2 years," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everything you described, I've experienced it too. The emptiness, the sense that something's wrong despite the supposed power. I thought I was the only one who felt that way." Marcus exchanged contact information with Alex and invited him to the support group. "You're not alone," he said. "That's the biggest lie, that you're alone, that you've gone too far to turn back. Neither of those things is true." The story of what happened at EMU spread through Christian circles and beyond. Marcus was invited to speak at more universities: the University of Toledo in Ohio, Wayne State University in Detroit, even Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. Each venue brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to share his testimony with people who needed to hear it. Summer arrived, bringing warmth and growth to Michigan. Marcus and Emily's relationship had deepened, and they'd begun talking seriously about marriage. His reconciliation with his father was ongoing, healing years of brokenness. The support group had helped more than 200 people transition away from occult involvement, with several going on to become advocates and counselors themselves. But Marcus knew his story wasn't finished. In many ways, it was just beginning. Each person who found freedom became part of an expanding testimony to the power of light over darkness, truth over deception, love over fear. The vision he'd experienced that night in his apartment had been a moment, but its effects rippled outward endlessly, touching lives he'd never meet and places he'd never go. Standing on the banks of the Huron River one warm July evening, Emily beside him in the sunset painting the sky in brilliant colors, Marcus thought about the journey that had brought him here. From the warlock of Washtenaw County to a man who'd encountered divine love and been forever changed. From darkness to light, from bondage to freedom, from death to life. "What are you thinking about?" Emily asked, leaning her head on his shoulder. Marcus smiled, watching the water flow past, constant and eternal. "I'm thinking about how grateful I am, how grace found me when I didn't even know I needed it, how love pursued me into the darkest places and refused to let me go, how many people are still trapped where I was, and how desperately I want them to know there's a way out." He thought about the celestial being, about wings of light and eyes that saw everything, about a voice that spoke truth with love. He thought about all the people who'd prayed for him without knowing him, warriors in an invisible battle who'd never see the fruit of their faithfulness in this life. He thought about second chances and transformation, and the reality that no one is beyond redemption. And he thought about tomorrow, about the next person who would hear his story and recognize their own struggle in it, about the next life that would be touched by the same light that had shattered his darkness. The sun set completely, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Marcus took Emily's hand, and together they walked back toward the lights of Ann Arbor, toward home, toward a future that had once seemed impossible, but was now gloriously, miraculously real. The warlock of Washtenaw County was gone. In his place stood Marcus Webb, a man who'd encountered heaven and would never be the same, whose story was shocking the internet not because it was sensational, but because it was true, a testament to the power of divine love to reach into any darkness, break any chain, and transform any life that opens to its light. If you're struggling with involvement in occult practices or feeling trapped in spiritual darkness, know that you're not alone, and it's never too late to turn toward the light. Marcus's story is just one among thousands of people who found freedom and peace. Don't wait for a crisis. Reach out to a trusted pastor, counselor, or spiritual mentor today. Your breakthrough may be closer than you think.